We are live.
I think you look way more like Claire does than Natalie Pesh does anyway. So
that makes me so happy.
At least the Claire I picture in my mind. So
all right, we're now live.
Yay!
Woo! We can give it a minute or two. This lighting is just gonna hate me apparently.
I think it's all right. It'll work.
Amanda is on her way now. Okay, let's do. Should we do this? No, we're not going to do it that way. There. Why is that not coming up? Leave it to me, of course. Okay. So, I think that we might as well just start getting on it a couple minutes early. Not the worst thing in the world.
Right.
Okay. So, hello, everybody. I am Erica Farner. I'm the project manager at the Parliament House. And we are here with three amazing horror authors to have a chat about horror and fiction. So let's start out just by introductions. We'll start with you, Darlene. Tell us about you. Tell us about your book. Both books.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So Darlene here, push under the name of Siciliano. I'm terribly intrigued by horror in general, probably because I'm the most scared person on the planet. I'm sure we'll dive into that later. But yeah, I have a couple books out, one through the wonderful Parliament House Press called Inside, which is an 80s horror novel that takes place in Massachusetts. 5 young friends decide to take on a haunted house because it could go wrong, right? And once they get inside this tiny little one-room house, they get spooked by a shadow, and they turn to run out the front door, and the door's not there anymore. And the evil is chasing them through this house and opening doors and rooms that don't exist. And some of these rooms and doors actually only exist within these kids' imagination or their life. So it's a very psychological and paranormal type story. It is very, very, very dark, you know, really dark and twisted, which is how I write. So there's that, which came out about a year ago. And Under Another Sun, which I just released about a month ago, is an apocalyptic horror novel, which may or may not be aptly timed, who knows, seeing as how we may or may not be in the middle of an apocalypse right now. But the world's falling down, the world's ending, and my main character getting signs and messages from his deceased sister, who's trying to guide him and save the family. So the question is he going to be able to do it at time? We don't know.
Check out the book to find out.
Check out the book.
All right, Don, how about you? Tell us about Claire at 16 and Usher House Rising and anything else about you want to talk about.
Yeah. So Claire at 16 is about a 16-year-old girl, obviously. And it's a 6-book series where she has a dissociative identity disorder. And under certain moments of stress, this personality comes out. Somebody usually dies, and then she is left trying to get away from a body. And mostly the people who kind of attempt to prey on her are usually creepy guys herself, so it's not really much of a loss when they die. But probably one of her worst horrors is kind of betraying the people who love her and take care of her. And she's just kind of trying to find her place in the world with her affliction. And kind of like Bruce Banner in the Hulk, it's the beast kind of unleashes at the most inopportune times, and she tries to figure out a way to kind of harness it. But with varying degrees of success. And it's a 6-book saga that follows Claire from 16 to 21. So Usher House Rising is it's a modern rendition of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House Usher. It's a story of Madeline Usher and Roderick Usher, who were orphaned at birth, separated at birth. They're orphans. They find out that they inherited this crumbling mansion in southern Georgia called Usher House. And not only do they inherit the mansion, but the Usher family is prodigious for their insanity that usually kind of attacks them at a more advanced age. So they kind of are cohabitating and trying to figure out, how to deal with this. Madeline is kind of trapped there with her very narcissistic, gaslighting brother, and she's kind of trying to figure a way to get out, at the same time stop the family curse from destroying her and everything forever. So that's the 3-book series that's coming out too.
All right. What about you, Marlena? Tell us about The Seeking. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. My name is Marlena Frank, and I'm a YA fantasy author. The Seeking is a novel. Basically, every year the children of the exalted have hiding from the people of Kara, and Dolly Priest is a child of the exalted family. And if they are captured or killed during this process, then whoever has captured them will be the new exalted family. Now, Kara has a boundary line location that protects them from the creatures that live in the woods. But the Grey people actually also walk them from outside the boundary line and make them safe. They protect them from the creatures of the woods. So, the people of Kara get used to creatures watching out in the trees. They're like, oh, they're watching over us. And the story plays a part, may not necessarily be the case. I consider it a cross between A Quiet Place and Hunger Games.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm being told that I'm echoing when I'm not speaking. Holy moly.
Yeah. There's a lot of feedback happening.
So sorry about that, guys. Okay, so let's move into some of your background with horror. What authors inspired you? What specifically inspired each of your novels? What is the most appealing part of horror for you that made you want to write horror?
I'm doing me first. That was about 7 questions, so see if I can keep up with all of them. I think we were talking about, or you asked about some influences, some other writers that are really great influences. Shirley Jackson, one of the all-time greats. I mean, she's a master. One could only strive to be as genius and twisted and beautiful as she is, and as she was and as she wrote. Currently, I would say definitely Stephen King. It's one of those things that people forget. He writes other than horror, and he writes some really amazing books outside of horror. Paul Tremblay right now, I'm in love with every single one of his books. There's something just absolutely genius about him. And another really lesser known author that I kind of keep as a secret, so now I'm going to let you guys know about this one. But he's mostly speculative fiction, not specifically horror. His name is Graham Joyce. And there's something so gorgeous about reading his work. I'll read just one line, and I have to put the book down and just sit there for a second. It's amazing and just really captivating. Horror in general is always an interesting question for me to try to answer because people think, oh, well, you must be really, really dark. And I'm not, and I scare very easily. It's ridiculous how easily I get scared. And I'd like to think that it's because I just have a very active imagination, and I always have. You know, I lived in a very old house in Massachusetts and spent a lot of time in a lot of those old houses that would creak, and you know, a draft would come out of nowhere, and instead of what probably most people would say, oh, okay, there's a draft here, or, you know, the wood is expanding, right? I would go, oh, there's obviously a ghost walking on those stairs, or, you know, because it's more fun and there's something intriguing about the extraordinary and outside the realm of what we can understand and what we can see. That's always been very, very captivating for me. And I think that's why I write what I write, you know, and to bring people into that world. And one of the most intriguing things for me is when I'm able to really captivate somebody who doesn't read horror at all, and they're sucked into the story, or they're sucked into the characters, and then they go, oh, you know what? I'm going to pick up another horror novel. I just did this to my neighbor. She's like, I can't get enough of your writing and Shirley Jackson, and why have I not been paying enough attention to horror in general? And I think there's this strange stigma attached to horror. Oh, I'm inviting you to dive in.
Oop. So sorry, having some technical difficulties, of course. I agree. I think that horror is inevitably one of the most fascinating things because we like to think about what makes us tick. So, anyways, I will pass it on to you, Dawn. Some influences or your background, anything like that.
Influence in horror really started with films. Watching a lot of scary films. The first film that just terrified me to no end is, this is going to date me, but I saw Jaws in the theater when I was 8 years old, and absolutely, it was the most amazing experience I had. There was lines around the block. We were watching the movie. People were throwing up, screaming, running up and down the aisles, and I was just captivated by it. You know, got the John Williams soundtrack, would try to reenact the movie. I wanted to remake it with our family's 8mm camera, which I'd never even thought of making movies before. Cut 2 years later, this movie called The Shining came out, and I was like, whoa, the trailer was on TV. I was like, what's that about? And a friend of mine's like, you got to read this book, The Shining. It's brilliant. And I read it, and all of a sudden I wanted to be a writer-director. So really it was those two things together, and that was the summer of '81, and that's when I started making my own movies and writing my own scripts. And Stephen King's work was really, and Stephen King's work and Steven Spielberg's movies were really kind of the catalyst for that. Other authors, of course, The Shining would not exist without The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I think, I mean, The Shining is up there as far as brilliant novels, but The Haunting of Hill House, I think, is the most brilliant haunted house novel ever written. I mean, hands down. Shirley Jackson, she's the master, and just the psychological aspect of that and the language that she uses and is able to, catapult you. And if you really read Hill House, I mean, it just gets under your skin in a way that no other writer can. So, Shirley Jackson, Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes is one of my absolute favorite books. So those kind of stories definitely informed my own. I'm definitely obsessed with haunted houses. So my Snowblind series, Usher House are definitely variations on that theme. And in a way, Claire is too, because she's a haunted house. It's just her mind that's haunted, and she can't escape that. So she's constantly carrying that around. So I guess that aspect of being haunted is certainly a theme that I explore, and trying to find kind of a place in the world, while dealing with that kind of haunting, whether it's interior or on the exterior. So I guess that's what I'm about.
All right. What about you, Marlena?
Well, I grew up in a household where my mother just had horror stuff everywhere. She would always have a horror movie, like a B movie horror film on. I watched Jaws was like one of her favorite films, and then like The Blob and Thing and all of that kind of stuff was just like just in the background all the time. But it didn't help that I was a terrified child of everything. So I would watch them and be like, "Oh man, that's so scary! I can't handle that." Flash forward to me being an adult, like when I was a child, I couldn't even pick up some of the Stephen King books or anything. I was like, I look too terrified. I'm not going to be able to deal with that. But flash forward to being an adult, and I'm reading so much horror now, and I'm just like, wow, I've missed out on so much excellent work. Because horror is one of those genres that kind of gets under your skin and sticks with you longer than some other genres do. Some of the authors that I've really been inspired by, of course, Stephen King. Sherry Priest has written some really good horror novels that I've enjoyed. She has a werewolf one. I can't remember the name of it right now. I think Dreadful Skin is the name of it. It's really good. Anne Rice, really into Vampire Chronicles. Dean Koontz, his book Phantoms, really left an impact on me. But I've always been once I started really getting into horror, I really loved monsters. And I really attest that to, watching those B-movie horror films, watching MST3K, because a lot of those, I used to watch that with my dad, but a lot of those are kind of looking at horror, but giving it a bit of a comedic shift to it. And so it made it more palatable for me as a kid who was terrified of everything. I still watch movies with like my eyes closed.
I couldn't like that.
Yeah. But horror books just like are on a different level, I think. And like I recently read like Bird Box from a few years back, and that's such an incredible novel. I think there's so many amazing horror authors right now that we're really, really fortunate, I think.
All right. I agree, especially Dean Koontz. He's one of my favorites. What is your oldest memory or your favorite memory with horror? The thing that really got your brain going, like, this is freaking terrifying. I mean, obviously Don mentioned a little bit about Jaws for him, but like, what's the thing that you remember the most that gives you your fondness for horror?
I'm going to just go with my initial reaction when you asked the question of when I was a kid, Poltergeist and The Exorcist. Both of those movies. I still to this day don't think I've watched either of them from start to finish, because still to this day, I cannot watch either of these from start to finish. They terrify me. I think after I accidentally saw, I can't remember which one I saw first, but after accidentally seeing one of them for the first time, I had to sleep with the lights on for like 2 weeks. And as, Marlena alluded to, she said she's still a big scaredy cat. I still am too. If I watch something that's terrifying, I'm still like, it's too dark in here. I can't handle this. But yeah, and then you guys are probably going to laugh at me, but I'm totally comfortable with that. But when I was a kid, if you guys remember the Thriller video from Michael Jackson, I happened to walk into the room and not know what that was in the very beginning of it when he was changing, and that scared me. So you guys can gauge like literally how frightened I am of just everything in general, because a music video scared the life out of me also. But yeah, just ghosts. The paranormal in that, everything in that little realm of ghosts and demons and devils and I can't handle. And so then I write about it.
That was actually me with Stephen King's It. Saw it when I was 4, have not been able to look at clowns since. Just no. What about you, Don, besides Jaws?
Well, I would say since about probably 3 or 4 years old, like while other kids in the neighborhood, their heroes were like sports figures and stuff, mine was Dracula. Like I wanted to be Dracula. I kind of grew up where they would show, they had Creature Feature on every Saturday, and they'd usually show 2 movies. A lot of times they were the old Universal films or the Hammer horror films. So I had a very gothic sensibility at a very early age. I'm sure that's kind of where Usher House came from. But the thing is, I wasn't as scared of those monsters as I felt a kinship with them, especially Dracula and the Wolfman, because the Wolfman especially, he was always a very sympathetic character and an outsider, and I just really related to them because they were always on the fringes of society, and no matter what they did, I mean, they were kind of victims of their own circumstance, and they were usually crucified for it. So mostly I would dress up like them and run around the neighborhood like a werewolf or Dracula. So I was never really terrified of them. I actually kind of was in love with them and really kind of idolized them. I just like had the models and everything like that. I still have those. I just always love the classic monsters like that. Creature from the Black Lagoon is another one. I just always felt a kinship with the outsider. That's kind of, horrific, but there's something more going on the inside of them. So they didn't always choose to be what they were. That just happened to them. So I've always kind of gravitated towards that. And I'm sure Claire is kind of from that.
That's an adorable image. Like a werewolf.
Yeah, I think that's something we can all kind of relate to, like the feeling of being an outsider and
absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Marlena?
Well, my introduction, since I didn't feel comfortable watching horror movies all the time, was dark fantasy films, which were in the 80s all over the place. Films like Return to Oz and The Legend have some really frightening scenes in them, but that was kind of my introduction into more horror. And then I watched It. I remember the skeleton in the It TV series was what really got me. I was like, no, I can't deal with this. And then in because my mom always had background movies on, she had the 80s version of The Blob, and there is a scene in that where a dude gets pulled down a sink drain, and I was like, nope, can't handle, nope. But it was like baby steps up to more advanced horror until it doesn't bother me as much nearly as it used to.
As far as the drain thing goes, I still to this day when I'm taking a shower, like the concept of closing my eyes because I watched The Grudge when I was a kid. Nope. Can't keep my eyes closed in the shower anymore.
Mm-hmm. I want to mention too, Don, you reminded me there was a werewolf series in the 80s too. Really like along the lines of that sympathetic.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you guys think is the absolute key to successful horror that really chills the bones? We'll start with you, Darlene.
Great horror that really, chills you to the bone. Did I catch that right? Well, I think that is all very personal for each of us, right? Because what scares me is not going to be what scares Dawn, and it's not going to be what scares Marlena. And I think that's the beauty of it, is finding how to relate on a personal level, or relay maybe my fears on a personal level to you and have you understand it and react to it. So, for example, I love paranormal type horror, and I love psychological horror, but there are people that aren't going to connect with that because it's not what resonates for them. Watching a lot of horror movies, I often find that I'm enjoying the journey, and then when I get to the end of it, sometimes I'll be let down because their representation of the scariest thing they can think of is not what my mind would have thought. So I think I'm indirectly answering your question, but I just think whatever kind of gets that feeling for you, whatever makes you react, whatever. However you can connect, in general. And I think you might have stumped me a little bit with that because I'm floundering a bit, but just because it's such a personal thing, and we're all going to react really differently. So, when we're writing our books and we're putting our work out there, right, we're putting that representation of what we think is terrifying, and we hope that we can connect with readers.
Yeah, I think that's how it is with a lot of art too. Like, art is very subjective, and the things that get to each of us are obviously going to be different. So, what are your thoughts, Dawn?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to kind of expand on what she said. Is when I was first writing my books for Scholastic, and these were kind of middle grade books. I kind of had to go back and be like, what scared me at that age? And I'm like, oh, I was a big tough Army Ranger. Nothing scares me. And then I went back and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm terrified actually of everything. I just kind of put this veneer over it. So kind of going back into my own personal fears really informed all of those stories. And I also think just not beyond my own work, you really have to have a character that we're rooting for and we want to see. I think that's one testament to Stephen King's just timelessness is he creates these great characters that we want to follow and we want to see. I think he did a quote that said something like, I like to create. I like to create people that we love and then throw monsters at them. And that's really what it comes down to. I mean, all the scares in the world will not matter if you do not care about the protagonist in it. So I think it's a combination of following your own fears. Like, say you have a fear of abandonment or something like that. Well, you could write a whole novel. That is your fear. So you could just take that fear and ratchet up a few degrees and write about that fear. Alfred Hitchcock had a career of all the fears that he had: fear of police, fear of being locked in locked spaces. All of his entire are all about his fears. So really exploring those two things is your fears through a character we can sympathize and relate to. I think you're golden from that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I apologize, my children are going wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely agree. I think, at least in my mind, suspense is the biggest thing that does it too.
Yeah.
Let's hear your thoughts, Marlena.
Well, I agree with what both Darlene and Dawn said earlier. I think that's very poignant, the fact that each person has a different kind of fear. And dig into those fears, you can produce really good work that's going to resonate with people who share those kind of fears. I think one thing that really seems to get under people's skin that I've seen is when people encounter something that terrifies them, they want rules to exist for it. They want to know that they can try to bargain, or that they can try to convince, that they have some kind of leeway that they can pull, or they know the rules for the slasher killer thing, But whenever there are no rules for the horrific thing that they're encountering, that really tugs at people's impulse and that instinct of terror, I think, because the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. And I think that that's a really powerful emotion that you can tap into as a horror author, in the fact that you can't negotiate or bargain with these things. We were talking about like Ju-on and The Grudge and stuff earlier, and that was kind of the idea behind those films that really got underneath my skin when I first watched the more Japanese horror films. Was that you can't just talk with a ghost and convince them that, hey, I'm not really here to do anything negative to you, I promise. You have to just deal with the consequences, and regardless of where you go, they hunt you down regardless. So there's a sense of powerlessness, and there's a sense of no rules, no logic behind it that you can't do. So.
Sorry, I've been muting my mic as you guys talk to try and mitigate some of the echoiness.
Oh, that's fine.
But yeah, that I definitely agree with that. I think that's an interesting point, as the unknown. I think that gets to almost everybody universally, not knowing what to expect, not knowing the rules behind it, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
So, what are your favorite and least favorite classic horror tropes?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'll jump right down my least favorite. And not that there's anything against slasher type horror in general, but man, the girl always just seems so dumb. And, she always falls down at the wrong moment, and she's always screaming instead of reacting. And so that I have a really hard time with. I love when it doesn't have to be the woman, but the object of the attacker stands up for themselves, or they were able to fight back or turn the tables around a little bit. So, I don't want that predictable, oh no, this person screamed, now they're going to fall down, and now they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Ta-da. So, I think we might have lost Erica there for a moment. I think that kind of leads back around into, what my favorite is. And this is much more vague, but I just like something unexpected. I don't want to be led down that path and at the end go, okay, yeah, I knew that was coming. I want unique. I want to be thrilled. I want to be terrified. And I want to be surprised. Even if I get to the ending and it's not the ending that I wanted, I love when I get to the end of a book, and have to put the book down and think on it. When I read the Gunslinger series by Stephen King, man, for 2 weeks after I put that book down, that's all I thought about. And was I happy about the ending? Maybe, maybe not, but it was the exact ending that it needed to be, and it stood with me, and I think that's what it is. It's impact. When something impacts you so strongly that it sits with you for good or for bad.
On to you, Don.
Horror tropes I don't like. There's a lot of the horror tropes where it's like, hey, let's split up and find out what this is. Of course, safety in numbers, or the guy who's hiding the zombie bite from the group, or something like that. But I think it comes down to just when people, whether they're reading a book or certainly when they're watching a horror film, they want to empathize with that character. And if that character starts doing really stupid things that a smart, intelligent person would do, I think they check out a little bit. So having your characters think of all the possibilities, do all the right things. And then if they still do all the right things and they still can't, then all bets are off. Then you get something really interesting, because then you're like, oh, we're in uncharted territory here. How are they going to get out of this? And like going against the unexpected, when you can really set up expectations in a certain way and flip them. That's always good. I love that. I love to be surprised. I've seen every kind of horror film, read every kind of horror novel. So anybody who can flip the script on me, I'm in love with it, and if it works too. But it surprise me, like make you fall in love with your characters and surprise me, and you've got a fan for life. So, and yeah, the ending can be brutal and something that you didn't see coming. Kind of think of a film like Ari Aster's Hereditary. But at the same time, you're just shook and haunted by it, and think about it for days afterwards. Carrying it around with you, I think that's really the sign of some great work.
I would agree with that for sure. What are your thoughts, Marlena?
Kind of building off of what you guys already said on tropes that you don't like. I agree, the women in these slasher films who are running away and they trip over nothing and then they twist their ankle.
Right.
And it's just like, really? There's nothing there. There's literally nothing for you to trip over, but okay. Or you have a token person of color who's there and they're the first one to get killed. And you're just like, really? We're going to go down this path too? Again, going into what's unexpected is really a good way to pull me in, at least. I also just like at the end of a book or a film where you have Deus Ex Machina, where you end up having one guy and one lady who end up hooking up at the end because they survived this horrible thing. I feel like that's very traditional, and it's very you've seen it like a million times at this point. For horror that really resonates with people, I think you were mentioning Ari Aster, and I was thinking of Midsommar. And where you think the horror is one thing going into it, and it is. The horror of that is still there. But by the end of the film, the actual horror, the real horror kicks in, and you're like, wow, that's horrific. But it's also, of course, that makes sense. It's understandable why it went that way. And I think that kind of unexpectedness, where you're feeling sympathy for the protagonist, you're drawn into the story, you're worried about these people, but you're also like, a lot of these people I don't really like that much. By the end of it, the horror shifts from one to another. I think that's what's to me.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that there's that female character at the beginning that, she trips over nothing and she runs into the woods by herself. I'm like, can you please stop writing books about this dumb broad?
Yeah.
Please give us someone with a brain.
Or runs past the car with the keys in it. Yeah.
A lot of those tropes went out in the 80s, and it's just like, a lot of it just kind of came down to lazy writing, but people just keep using that over and over again. It's like, come up with something different,
I wonder if it's just because you're getting a reaction. I mean, even if it's a negative reaction, right? Because we're all reacting negatively to it, but we all have strong reactions for it. So maybe that in itself, I don't know.
Yeah. We remember it too, so maybe that's...
And I do love when films like Scream or Freaky, that's out in the theaters now, make fun of those tropes. It's like, oh, we're the black man and lesbian, we're so dead. Takes those tropes and flips them around and just shows them for the ridiculousness that they are.
I know that there's a comfort to that kind of horror that what's going to happen next.
Right.
Goes across the same process. Right. But those are kind of films or books that you just kind of breeze through or put in the background while you're doing stuff, because you know how it's going to go. It's not going to throw you out of your expectations. But I think that there is a large need for more kinds of horror that is shocking and unexpected like that.
Right.
Absolutely. I think that's flipping tropes and stuff like that. That's one of the fascinating things about Claire at 16. Because she's a female serial killer.
Right.
There's also this horror movie that is coming out on the market soon, if not it's already out, that it's like a young girl and a serial killer switch bodies.
That's freaky. I was just talking about that. Yeah. A lot of fun.
They have to try and figure out how to switch into the proper bodies again. It sounds wild. I want to see it for sure.
It's a lot of fun. Just seeing Vince Vaughn play a teenage girl is worth the price of admission. So definitely a lot of fun. And it makes fun of all those tropes that you're very familiar with too. So
exactly. So what specifically scares you? And does that translate to your main characters?
Well, yes. And yes, absolutely. They say write what you know, right? So I know how to be really scared. And so I'm going to make my characters be really scared. I think we touched upon it a little bit before, but paranormal and psychological horror, both of those terrify me to no end, especially if you can mix both of them together. That is where I really get excited, and that's a lot of what I write. Hopefully when you're reading my novels, there's a thought of, is something extraordinary going on here? Is there a paranormal presence? Is there something otherworldly? Or is my main character really just suffering psychologically? Or possibly is it both? And I love that when I watch movies or read books that are like that, because of that back and forth, and also because it brings the extraordinary into the real world, right? Because we all suffer with, stress or mental illness or whatnot, and so to have it be a little bit more tangible, I think, in horror is pretty terrifying. One of the main characters that I'm writing right now she's walking a really fine line. Her wife disappeared in the fog 10 years ago. And she's going through this terrible, terrible, terrible experience. She's grieving, she's mourning, she hears sounds and thinks her wife is back. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, her wife comes back to her completely unaged. Or does she? You know, so now she's walking this fine line of, is her wife a ghost? Is she truly returned? Where did she return from that she hasn't aged at all? And she's also having this internal battle of, do I really care? Do I care if she's a ghost? Do I care if I finally just crossed the line and just kind of lost it, and I'm just emotionally, drained and brought her back only in my mind? That will always inspire me. That will always move me, and I hope that there's an audience for it as well. So,
I think for myself, there's not too many things that kind of scare me without maybe like the loss of my child or a loved one is definitely probably my biggest fear. Most of my fears are within. Like, what if people find out I'm really a fraud? Or what if they really find out this is who I am? Or what if they don't accept me? And a lot of that comes from just not having self-acceptance, and always being hard on yourself, I think. But I think most of that kind of comes internally. And I certainly explored that in Claire at 16. It's like, what if people everybody who cares about me really find out who I really am? And really what I do when I'm lying to them, I think that's kind of definitely one of my biggest fears. Yeah, I don't know if that's a fear, but that's what scares me.
All right, what about you, Marlena?
So for me, again, like Dawn was saying too, like losing a loved one is perhaps my biggest fear, especially if it was something that was preventable.
Right.
That makes it even worse. And in The Seeking, Dahlia has to deal like that's one of her biggest fears in the book, that something's going to happen to her or her family. And there's a lot of discussion about family ties with her and her two brothers, and the struggles that they deal with throughout the terror of The Seeking. And I think that is something that a lot of people obviously can relate to. But, whenever there are things happening in the world that you can't control, that happens regardless, that even makes it worse. That makes your paranoia and your concern for everybody even worse whenever you don't have control over things. You can't prevent things that might have normally been preventable or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's always so terrifying to me to imagine that someone that I care about could be hurt or something like that, and the fault falls to me. Like, if there was something that I could have done, that's my biggest fear.
Right.
So what classic horror character or creature could your MC kick ass in a fight? What do you think, Darlene?
Oh, man, I don't know that she could kick any of their butts in the state that she's in. That's for sure. I think she's pretty well worn right now, and she's in such despair and grief that I think she's actually easy prey for some of these monsters or bullies or whatever you want to call them. So I think she'd have a really tough time slaying that. I think for her, it's all about slaying her inner demons. And her own fears that have nothing to do with paranormal or creatures or the extraordinary. It's just tackling who she is and how she grieves and her love for her wife and how she moves on and finds some semblance of normalcy in this world that's just been tipped upside down.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating take on it. Like, kind of her own brain is her biggest enemy, so to speak. I like that. What about you, Don? Are there any specific creatures or characters that Claire or Mads could absolutely whoop in a fight?
I would love to see Claire take on Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, because he's kind of the epitome of everything she hates. He's a misogynist. He's kind of privileged. He's a user. So, like Dexter, I really like kind of Dexter. So I feel like her and Dexter would kind of be more on the same side. But Patrick Bateman is kind of a douche. So I would love to see her like give him a taste of his own medicine, because he loves to terrorize people and play with their emotions and fuck with them. Whoops. And I would love to see her give some of that back. So, yeah.
I am wildly in love with Dexter. It is my favorite show ever.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You mentioned him and I'm like, yes!
Yeah.
What about you, Marlena? What about your main character? Who could they kick butt?
Oh gosh, probably not for many things. They don't have guns in that world or anything like that. So she might be able to survive against undead, like zombies and things, but assuming that she could survive the first onslaught and figure out what she needed to do because she's a survivor. If she knew how to stop them and how to, find a way to hide and things like that, she could do that. But, if she doesn't figure it out quick, that would be a negative.
I think that's a fascinating thing about horror too, is no matter how many horrors each character faces within their world, there are always other characters and creatures out there that could flip everything upside down that they weren't expecting.
Yeah.
So, what are you currently working on or planning? What's next? What's the hot gossip? What's the cool jams? Tell me everything.
Well, I already more than intimated at the next novel that I'm working on, the working title, Shape of My Heart. But I also have another project they're both about the same amount of completion, as in they're both on pause right now. But another story called In Between, and it's about a girl who was very troubled when she was young, and she, for some reason, has this thing called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, which is actually a very real syndrome. When you're a child, you're all nodding, so hopefully you know about it, but for those of you who might not know about it, it's a really intriguing disorder, I guess you would call it, that for some reason affects you when you're younger and you get really, really tired. Your perception is completely altered, and it's just like being in Alice in Wonderland. And so if, for example, I was really, really tired, 6-year-old me or 6-year-old my character, she would look at her dad, and all of a sudden her dad's head was way too big. And then she'd look at the couch he's sitting on and be like, how is he sitting on this couch? Because it's Barbie sized. It's just, everything was just, it's not normal. And so she has this strange view of perception already. And because of the syndrome, it actually allows her to see in between worlds, in between the world we reside in and whatever else is on the other side. And she's haunted by this as a child, and she never really rectifies it because her family doesn't believe her. And so as an adult, about to start her own family, she decides to go back to this house and go back to confront both her inner ghosts and the ghosts that reside in the house, and try to rectify what happened.
That's fascinating. I've never heard of anything like that before, but I can imagine that it would be quite scary if you had to deal with something like
absolutely.
That.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
I have a friend who is a synesthete. She has synesthesia. So, there are times when she's listening to music where she just randomly starts seeing colors and shapes. The human mind is fascinating.
Yeah.
What about you, Don? What else are you working on, planning? What's in the works for you?
Well, I'm editing Usher House for the rest of the year for Parliament House, and I'm finishing a novel called Lord of the Yards. It's a little bit different. It's more of a love story between two boys, teenage boys. Takes place in the summer and fall of 1982. It's actually based on a screenplay I wrote about 20 years ago. Like Usher House also started as a screenplay I wrote about 15 years ago. So it's a story that I really missed the characters and always stuck with me. And I kind of added a new wrinkle to it where Jim, the main character, has a stepfather who has a very secretive past. And there are some deaths happening in this small town that he may or may not be involved with. And so Jim kind of has to sort of navigate the waters between a very conservative, homophobic society where he's kind of in love with this person who really gets him. And it's kind of enlarging his world with knowledge and love of books and love of language, and it just kind of realizing there's a larger world outside of this very small town. And then his stepfather, who's very, very keen, very perceptive, and kind of might realize that his stepson might be kind of onto him and what he's doing. So I would say it's kind of like Stand By Me meets a Hitchcock movie like Rear Window or Shadow of a Doubt. So kind of having fun with it, and just kind of revisiting the 80s, about the time when I was a teenager, and just kind of just reliving in that world again. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I'm just finishing it up. I really have like 5,000 words, and I think I'm going to be done with the first draft. So, yeah.
That's exciting. It's such a big thing when you're near the end of a new manuscript. It's like, check.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's so awesome. What about you, Marlena? What's on the docket for you?
Well, I've got the third book in the Stolen trilogy, Chosen, that comes out March 23rd of next year. That's pretty much all finished. Just going through galleys, I think, next. So I'm excited to see that. Finishing a trilogy, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm also planning a horror anthology. I've been writing short stories for about 10 years now, mostly in horror. So I'm planning on kind of collecting all those with a few original pieces and putting that in an anthology together. It'll be my first one, so I'm nervous and excited. I'm also working on the sequel to The Shield of Kanta, which I wrote a few years back. It's going to be called The Blood of Kanta. Basically, it's a steampunk world with werewolves, following the daughter of a werewolf hunter. So, continuing up where that novella left off. So, yeah, lots of pots on the stove right now.
I love that. Lots of irons in the fire. Get lots of things going at once. That way, if you get tired of one, you can work on the other.
Yeah,
so the person who's got like 6 novels in the works right now. Anyways. All right, hold on a second. Got my other questions over here for you guys. If you were to spend one day in your favorite horror novel or movie, which one would it be? What about you, Darlene? Let's see.
Oh, man, I wish I didn't go first on this one. Anybody else have theirs picked out yet? Because I don't.
I'm going to go with movie because that one comes quickly enough for me, but American Werewolf in London.
Oh, nice.
Not on the road when they have the big accidents at the end. I'll just be in a window watching, like, oh man, I see the werewolf. No. That'd be okay. And I wouldn't take the subway at all. No.
For me, Final Destination, that movie, I don't know if it's technically considered horror, but like, I would be the
terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. I would be the person in Final Destination that's just sitting there, like, not leaving my house, cowering in a corner, hiding with all of my books and trying to escape the world. But any thoughts yet, Darlene or Dawn?
I mean, Dawn, if you've got it, you can go because I'm still simmering over here.
I don't know. I've just always loved the Bates Motel and the house on the hill. In fact, someday I want to get the plan, so I want to create a replica house like that. Molly's like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yes, I am." But I would, yeah. I don't know if be kind of a weird place to live and experience, but I just have such a love for that house on the hill, that old Gothic Victorian house, and I don't know. I could. I don't know if I don't want to share that with Norman Bates and his mother, but I don't know. That would be kind of a fun place to be for a while.
Fun fact, actually, Norma Bates is like one of my dream roles. If I could play her and like on stage or on screen, my dream.
Oh yeah.
It would be so fun to portray her. All right, Darlene. Yeah. I see it cooking on your face.
Yeah, and it was simmering, and then Dawn just like turned the heat up for me, and all of a sudden The Shining popped into my head. And as terrifying as it would be to be inside that movie and inside that hotel, like that's still one of my desires in the real world, to visit that hotel and try to see if I could actually sleep and spend a whole night there, which I'd be terrified, but I bet it would just bring up so much. So, that would be extremely awe-inspiring.
That was definitely my second choice. But I was like, the Overlook Hotel, once you get in, it's like the Roche Motel. You don't come out. So I was like, I want at least a place I might be able to escape.
Oh, totally. Well, yeah, I grew up there. So I'm like, well, I'll be fine there. Everything's great.
Right.
We all think that. We're like, I'd be okay there if I can rewrite the rules.
Right.
I mean, also for me, Tower of Terror. I went to Disney, I got on the ride, and the entire time I was sitting there like, God, I would love to go to this, like, in the real world with, like, actual ghosts. 10 out of 10.
I wouldn't want to live in the Twilight Zone world, though. No thanks. It's way too many things that could happen bad.
That's fair. Pretty wild. Okay, do you guys have a favorite regional or international horror story, such as like the Bunyip in Australia or El Chupacabra in like Latin America? Do you guys have any favorite cryptids like that really spook you?
The Mothman is always really spooky.
Yeah.
That whole concept, like if you dig into people's stories for stuff, that's like, what the heck is this?
I am very obsessed with banshees, like from Celtic Ireland, that kind of lore. One of my works in progress is a book about a person who realizes that she's a banshee in the end, and I think that the concept of a woman heralding someone's death is just like peak womanhood. I'm like, slap a label on me and call me done, because I would love to be a banshee who gets to just scream and people die. Sign me up.
Wow.
What about you, Don?
Well, for me, growing up in the Pacific Northwest, and my parents had a cabin up in the Blue Mountains, Sasquatch was always a fascinating, because, at the time when I was growing up in the 70s, I mean, there were Sasquatch documentaries everywhere, and there were like these almost found footage kind of movies at the theater, these really cheesy movies. So his lore was very seductive, very terrifying. I was afraid of him. Now, of course, it's just like, hey, if he's up there, leave him alone. He's doing his own thing. But at the time, I mean, the idea that there was this, 8-foot kind of beast kind of roaming, around where we had our cabin. I mean, there'd been sightings, whether they were true or not, I don't know. But you go to the local store, up the road, and they would have these Bigfoot tracks that were, plaster and everything. So it was living when there was an area where there could potentially be a monster was fascinating and kind of terrifying at the same time, especially when you were little, and you'd have to go outside at night to use the outhouse, which was like, I'm not going out there. So yeah, that was a fascinating time, as a kid.
There's still so many places that you can only get to via helicopter.
Absolutely.
Times a year, there's still so much of the world that is inaccessible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I should say.
Yeah, that's what my Snowblind series definitely was part of just growing up with that kind of lore. So
for me, I was trying to remember the name of it, and I grew up back in Western Massachusetts, and there was this road we always drove down as kids. I want to say it was Rockadundy Road. I mean, the name itself was amazing, but if you drove down this road at night, you would not always, but you would almost always have something supernatural happen to you. Whether there was a woman on the side of the road that wasn't really there, or a car would start following you. You'd see these, headlights, and then it would just disappear because there was no car there. Really quirky, weird things would happen late at night, as a teenager while you're driving down this road that no one could really ever explain, and it just became the local legend. There's also a local legend here. I live in Napa Valley now, in Northern California, and there's a local legend called the Rebobs. And I really need to look into this more because in my mind, I haven't researched it enough, but in my mind, it's kind of a cross between like the monkeys from The Wizard of Oz, and also like they might possibly be mechanical. And it's very strange, very weird, and I'm always like, I need to research that further. So I think eventually I'll probably at least write a short story about the Rebobs of Napa Valley.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
It's really quirky. It's really strange.
That's fascinating too. Like all the different cryptids that you read about, it's so cool to hear like the conglomeration of things they are. Like a bunny is supposed to be like the head of a horse and like the body of a lion and stuff like that. Like, it's so cool to think about. All right. I think I'm going to have one or two more questions, and then we're probably going to wrap it up here. We're hitting darn near close to an hour. How has writing horror impacted you as a writer or as just a consumer of horror yourself?
So as a writer, it actually has taught me to be patient. I'm not a very patient person, and there's something really amazing about a slow build. Building anticipation, setting the scene, making sure that you have everything in order to create the ultimate scare or thrill or whatever it is that you're aiming for. I remember when I first started writing, and I do this when I'm drafting now, right? You have this thought in your head, like, just get it down on paper. Just get it down on paper. And when you read it back to yourself, you're like, I literally just wrote random words sometimes. And then you go back in there and you take that one sentence and you paint it into this really beautiful scene where hopefully your reader can touch, taste, feel, smell what's going on. So patience, that's a huge, huge thing for me. I did not always have it, and I still lack it in many other facets of my life. But in writing, I am being much more patient.
You and me both, sis. All right, Don, what do you think?
Honestly, I love just living in these worlds. Like Usher House recently, I think I probably wrote it just because when I was growing up, I wanted my family to be weird and quirky, like the Addams Family or the Munsters or something like that. So I just wanted to live in that world, in that kind of gothic world. So for me, I mostly just write these stories as a kind of comfort in a way, which sounds weird with its horror, but I just like spending time in those places, and it's kind of a solace away from social media and everything that's going on in the world. It's just to even though writing is hard and it never gets any easier, there's still a solace to it. Just kind of spending time there, and I try not to force the words as much as they just kind of inform me, and I write them down as much as possible. So, I just kind of like living in those spaces for a while. But then I'm also happy to get out of them and move on to something else. But for the time being, whatever it is, 6 weeks or 3 or 4 months, whatever it takes to write a novel, depending on how the flow is going, I just find it kind of a solace to live in haunted houses or in a haunted mind, as strange as that is.
No, I don't think that's strange at all. Like, there's
Yeah,
definitely a comfort in retreating from the current world and finding another one
Right.
where you control your greatest fears, so to speak. I think that's awesome.
Right.
That's so fascinating. Marlena,
Yeah.
what about you? How has writing horror impacted you?
Well, a lot of the ideas I get from my horror novels come from nightmares, really vivid nightmares that I sometimes have. And getting it down, I'll just wake up in the middle of the night, and even if I'm like still like, oh god, that was terrifying, I'll put it down in a journal so I can look at my notes later. And usually, a whole novel can come out of a scene that I've dreamed or something like that. So it's nice for me, like it's not all in my head anymore. I'm able to be like, oh wow, that was a good nightmare. Let me get that down on paper. You know, that was terrifying for me. It's definitely going to be terrifying for other people. I think that's you know, for me that's nice because I can get it out of my head a little bit. But when I'm writing the novels itself, it's kind of nice to go into your world where everything is like there's all sorts of danger everywhere, and then you come out and then you're like, oh, I don't live in that world. That's nice. So you get to come up for air and be like, oh, good, this is great, you know. And then you go back down into the horrific environment that your character is in, and kind of channel their emotions. But you get it all out onto the page instead of having it in your head, which helps me a lot.
Yeah, kind of like a release. Like you just kind of get the pressure off of your head and put it somewhere else.
Yeah,
that makes sense. All right, well, I think we're going to call it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Darlene and Dawn and Marlena. I think we had a lot of fun. I loved hearing about your books and your thoughts on horror. And to anyone watching, thank you so much for joining us for our Miami Book Fair panel today. Check out ParliamentHousePress.com for more spooky titles. All ranging everywhere on the speculative fiction scale, so to speak. So I hope you all have a great day, and we will catch you next time.